The NBA playoffs have started, and man, was it a great first weekend around the league. But from the Pacers specifically, what should they be watching? What types of strategies, what types of team builds are successful that the Pacers can emulate? And what other stuff should Pacers fans be observing in this postseason run? I'll break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, diving in to the NBA playoffs Pacers style. Pacers obviously not involved, didn't make it for the second 0.5, counting the play-in tournament season in a row, but they can learn a lot from the team still playing, from the roster build still playing, from the strategy still happening, and they can kind of observe what tweaks could be possible for them as a result of this playoffs. We'll get to it all today. From the strategies I think the Pacers need to learn from, or at least observe and figure out how they can apply it to themselves, the team builds the Pacers need to learn from, and same thing, potentially apply to themselves. And at the end, the third segment, what teams should the Pacers be watching for as, if things go poorly for them, a trade with the Pacers could make sense. We'll do it all today. Man, was it an awesome first weekend of the postseason. My predictions, looking bad. Already got Knicks fans calling me an idiot. Well-deserved. They were great in game one. I'm jazzed up because the Suns-Clippers game that just ended before this recording was so good. It's been a great first weekend of the playoffs. Pacers' perspective for this postseason is all very fascinating to me as I kind of dive through some of the notes. But you know, when I started this exercise, I usually look at stats or styles. Or last year I talked a lot about Memphis, right? What can the Pacers learn from a Memphis style plan of the possession style, and that the general possession versus efficiency battle will of course be fantastic in this postseason to observe for every team. But where I want to start this year, talking about what the Pacers could maybe learn or observe from this postseason, is pace, right? Pace, speed of play in general. A lot of teams that rely on transition or are good at early offense, those options may not be as easy or obvious in the postseason, right? And looking at the top pace regular season teams, we're one game into the playoffs, right? So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but the Warriors lost game one, the Spurs didn't make the playoffs, the Thunder didn't make the playoffs, the Lakers did win game one, the Pacers didn't make the playoffs, the Hawks lost game one, the Timberwolves were losing right when I clicked record, the Grizzlies lost game one, the Hornets didn't make the playoffs, the Bucks lost game one, the Jazz lost game one. Of the top 11 teams in regular season pace, one of them got a first game win in the playoffs. The Kings are 12, they won. And then the Pistons are next, the Rockets after that, the Magic after that, the Pelicans after that, the Blazers after that. Of the top 17 teams in regular season pace, two of them have a game one playoff win. 18, the Bulls are 8 of the top 19 teams. I should have kept going for this exercise. You get the gist, right? And this is not to say pace does not work in the postseason. It's been one game, but we do have evidence of being super fast and frantic like that is not necessarily as easy in the postseason as it is in the regular season, right? Things slow down in the playoffs, and that can make things more challenging in general. And there's a middle ground that makes sense, right? The championship Warriors last year were 15th in pace. They were first this year, but they're 15th last year. That makes a little bit more sense to me. The Celtics, who they met in the finals, were 24th, right? Slower. Just you go through all your options. You've got good ISO scores. When the game slows down and the defense is better, when the game plans are better, that can be better just for a team in general. The finalists from the year before, the Bucks and Suns. The Suns were 24th. The Bucks were a pretty fast-paced team 2 years ago. So it's that the Bucks could be an example for the Pacers and their style that's successful right now. The Bucks, 46 and 26 their championship year, were second in pace, right? They were a fast-paced team that year, right? So it's not impossible to be successful in the postseason with pace, but it is potentially a little harder if you're not a really good defensive team, an elite defensive team, potentially like that Bucks team, so you can consistently get yourself in transition, or if your early offense options aren't just amazing, right? So pace is really interesting because the fastest teams in the regular season had a bad start to the postseason or aren't even in the postseason in general. Even if you go in the opposite direction and look at the bottom teams in pace, right? The Cavs, the Heat had a great first round. The Sixers are in the bottom 5. The Knicks had a good first round win. The Nuggets are in the bottom part of this. The Nets, the Suns, the Clippers, the Celtics. Like, this seems like a good grouping of teams. And the talent is a part of this, right? Your roster build dictates your pace to an extent. but the Pacers could take some notes that the teams with roster builds that make them seem extremely threatening and talented play a little slower. I think the Pacers' identity is good. I don't think their pace is a negative right now, but I do think they're going to have to learn to play a little bit slower if they want to compete with some of these teams when they're improving and in the postseason one day. I think that is where I start when digging into some of these numbers. A second thing, strategically, I think the Pacers should be keeping an eye on. They were a fantastic passing team this year. Passing is good, right? Passing is good. I do not want to say that passing is bad. Let me be very clear. Passing the ball is good. Now, let's talk about passing with a little more context, right? I don't know if I read a story on this or if I read just data on this, but last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, something about the Jazz I was reading was about how they have started to pass less to limit turnovers intentionally. They finished fourth to last in passes per game last year. Here are the other teams near the bottom in passes per game last year. The Bucks, an amazing team. The Hawks, who made the playoffs. The Suns, who were a finals favorite. The Jazz, who made the second round of the playoffs. The Nets, who had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. The Bulls, who made the playoffs. The Grizzlies, who made the playoffs. The Clippers, who made the playoffs. You get the gist of what I'm saying. Again, I'm doing the same thing I did last part of this with the pace and explaining it. This year, the bottom teams in passes made. The Hawks made the playoffs. The Lakers made the playoffs. Then you have the Pistons. That's not as good. But also down near the bottom, the Cavs, the Bucks, the Mavs, the Knicks, the Grizzlies, the Suns, the Celtics, all these teams in the bottom 10, right? Now, again, not to say passing is bad, because the top of the passing list in the top 5, the Warriors, the Timberwolves, and the Kings, along with the Pacers, they made the playoffs, right? The Nuggets are 6th, the Heat are 7th. Passing can be good, but I think there is a balance of passing, especially on high-paced teams, where sometimes you're just causing yourself to have too many turnovers. And that is something the Jazz really were trying to master last year that I think will be fascinating to watch in the playoffs. I don't want to say the Pacers pass too much or too little, or that any team passes too much or too little, but I think there's a middle ground that makes the most sense. And the middle ground kind of suggests you have good early offense principles, but if all that gets cut off, or if a defense slows that down, you also have good isolation scores. You don't need to pass and risk a turnover to score. And so I think the number of raw passes that teams make in a game can be pretty reflective of both their talent level and the manners that they're able to score. And so for a Pacers team, the Pacers, for those unaware, were second in passes per game this season, one of 3 teams over 300. The other 2, Warriors and Timberwolves, both made the postseason, right? Passing, it can be good, right? I'm not here to belittle passing. Passing is smart, but like in the very middle range of the passes per game area, that's where your Celtics and your Suns and, some of the teams that I would consider more talented kind of hide, or teams that have the right balance that you consider them a championship style of team kind of hide. The Warriors at the top, obviously a little bit of an outlier there, but like the Lakers don't pass very much, and they looked really good in their first playoff game. The Bucks don't pass very much. Like the lower side of the passing spectrum seems slightly more threatening than the top end of the passing spectrum to me. Now, the Warriors have made a killing and a living on being a crazy dynamic offense passing team, and maybe that is something the Pacers can study, because I did just say the Pacers are second in passes. They're 16 away from the number the Warriors make per game. 16 fewer passes than what the Pacers made would drop them down to somewhere near 10th, where the Wizards, Bulls, and Hornets are, right? Like 16 is a ton of passes difference. So yes, they rank second, but the team ahead of them is way ahead. So that's another strategic thing. Like, how much do the teams that look the best, how much are they whipping the ball around and trying to set things up via passing and plays and misdirections and all that? The Nuggets, in the brief moments I was watching them before I started recording, were doing exactly that to the Timberwolves, right? Passing was great for them. Passing was not so great for, let's say, the Suns today, for example. They had a lot of turnovers in that game. So it's just something to monitor, because the Pacers' identity is so predicated on passing. I think the Pacers will be smart to watch that, along with the pace of successful teams. Bad defense squads in general, right? How do those teams hold up? Because the Pacers, if they're going to make the playoffs last year, like, they can and should get better on defense, sure. But I don't think they're going to go from 20, whatever they finished, 28th, 26th they finished, up to maybe, more than 20th. And in that case, is that enough to actually win you stuff in the postseason, right? So that's really, the Pacers should be watching the Kings, who finished bottom 10 in defense, the Hawks, who finished bottom 10 in defense. Those are the only 2 teams, by the way, who finished bottom 10 in defense that actually made the playoffs this year. But the Knicks were 19th. The Knicks defense, very impressive against the Cavs. That's part of why I did not pick them to win that series. The Clippers were below average on D, right? Those teams, how do they win? How do they do well? And can the Pacers emulate that? For the Clippers, it's just ratchet up to another level and just beat the Suns. And the last thing to talk about here, Rhett Bauer and I were messaging about this. Speaking of, he'll be on Wednesday this week talking about the Pacers off-season big picture. New teams holding up, right? Teams that make the playoffs for the first time. The Kings, for example, This is a very extreme example, but they're in the playoffs for the first time in 16 years. But also, this iteration of the Kings is in the postseason for the first time. Fittingly, this Kings-Warriors series reminds me a lot of Cavs-Pacers from 2017-18, the Oladipo team that pushed LeBron to 7 games. Like the narratives around it, the roster constructions involved, the defending champ level team. Like, man, that is just it feels really similar to me. The builds of those, or the structure of those kind of series. But the Kings are just one of the many postseason teams. Not many, but the Kings are just one of the postseason teams that are newer in build and have reached the playoffs this year, right? That, how do they hold up? Can they adjust to a playoff environment? Kings looked good in game 1. Certainly the Pacers also won game 1 the year they made it with the Oladipo team, right? The Nets have a new construction. They got the doors blown off of them against the 76ers in their first game, for example. Like teams like that. The Lakers look pretty fresh and new from a roster perspective. The Cavs are new as their roster construction of the playoffs. How do those teams look in the playoffs? That's something the Pacers need to study. And how do they hold up? How do they adjust, right? Are they prepared for that environment? So that's just strategy-wise stuff I think the Pacers should be watching in the playoffs this year. What about roster build-wise? General roster construction stuff the Pacers should have an eye on in this postseason. We'll dive into that in segment 2 because there's some teams I think the Pacers need to watch heavily and say what they're doing makes sense for us, what they're doing doesn't make sense for us, and there's a lot of ways this can generally go. Before we do that, though, guys, I need to talk to you about PrizePicks. PrizePicks daily fantasy made easy. Tonight, it's simple, right? You think Kevin Durant's going to have more or less than 6.5 assists, or Steph going to make more or less than 3.5 threes? That is the format of PrizePicks. You pick 2 to 6 players. Will they go over under a PrizePicks projection? You can up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's super simple, and it's not you versus other people. It's you versus PrizePicks projections, which is what I love about it. You can't get out-researched by someone else. Just your decisions versus their projections. They have projections on any sport you watch. You can make your picks in a minute or less. It's safe. There's fast withdrawals, and it's operational in over 30 states plus Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up, play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. You get the gist. Don't forget, enter the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks. Daily fantasy made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. My favorite playoff game so far is Suns Clippers. Brendan Clean, Locked On Suns, dime dropper, Darian Vaziri over at Locked On Clippers. Check them out for your second listen today for the hubbub behind that game. But man, all of them, pretty much except for Hawks Celtics, I found some joy, or a lot of joy, in all these playoff games. What a great start. The NBA's got to be buzzing about how their first weekend went of the postseason. Speaking of the postseason, Pacers learning from the roster builds of the teams playing. Every team is unique. The way they were built was unique. You could study all 29 other teams if you're the Pacers, but these are the teams still alive and playing. What about them could be relevant for the Pacers, or what do they need to look at? Let's start with the Cavs, who lost their first game. And the Cavs closed game 1 with Cedi Osman, and there was a lot of hubbub before the game about Isaac Okoro, will he play or not? And those players are good, and Isaac Okoro is a good defender. And to Cedi Osman's credit, he was excellent. He was really good in that game. He should have been closing. That said, that speaks a lot to their wing depth, right? That those are the guys that are being discussed as who should be the 3 for them. At some time, Karis LeVert's in that mix too, former Pacer, right? They're not a no-wing team. That's not the right way to put it, but they're light at that position. Hey, so are the Pacers, right? How can a team with no wings, how do they look in the playoffs? Can the Cavs, who are dominant inside, apparently despite just outside of rebounding, they were terrible on the glass, but Mobley and Allen are so good defensively on the interior and can make plays in the paint on offense, and they're so great at guard. Garland didn't play the best, but Mitchell was fantastic. Like those two in general, both at all-star peaks, right? How good can a team like that, that's light on the wing, but so good everywhere else, be? Because the Pacers currently trend to look a little bit like that. Maybe they can solve stuff at the 4. This is before the draft and free agency. Perhaps the Pacers don't look like them at all, but the base they have in place suggests, hey, they should be watching this Cavs team. The Grizzlies kind of fall into this setting to an extent. I mean, they don't have Clark right now, and like Bane is kind of a wing, but he handles the ball. He's definitely more of a guard. Like David Roddy was playing backup 3 for them. in this playoff game. Luke Kennard's like a 2-3. He was playing some wing. Like, they have more credible wings than the Cavs do, certainly. But they're another team that's like Ja and Biggs that are great. And Baines and Gar and whatever. You get what I'm saying? They're a much better version of the Cavs. They have great balance. They're a really good team. What did they do well? What can the Pacers learn from them? I think that is also a part of this no wing-ish or light on wings sort of thing. Because if the Pacers don't end up getting a guy or their guy at that spot this year, they're going to be running into some issues. Again, what can they learn from those teams? Or what do those teams do well to mitigate what they lose from having either size on defense or a really good scorer at that spot on the offensive end, right? How do they get around that? And there's other teams that are light on the wing, like outside of Kyle Anderson. I wouldn't say the Timberwolves are like stellar at that wing 4 spot, and they also start 2 bigs and 2 guards, right? So there's a lot of teams you could point to, but those are the 2 faces of it to me this postseason, Cleveland and Minnesota, or excuse me, and Memphis. So Pacers should definitely have their eyes on that. The flip side of this, teams with a ton of wings, Milwaukee, Boston, right? How do they look? And if they look awesome, and hey, those 2 teams are pretty good, can the Pacers take something from that and go, hey, we don't need 1 wing. We need like 3. We need a lot of guys to take a step forward. They're not the only team loaded on the wing, but they are the main 2, I would say, of this playoff bunch, right? The Heat have got some forwards. The Clippers have a ton of wings, although a lot of them are, not quite the highest of high levels. But in general, those 2 teams, like if they look amazing again, it's maybe just like, hey, we should get a trillion of these guys instead of just 1 or 2. The Pacers, taking this back to them a little bit in a different way. In year 1 of their build, their identity centered a lot around Tyrese Haliburton, right? Rick Carlisle and Kevin Pritchard called him a partner with the franchise. A lot of the way they play was based around his strengths, as they should have. He's amazing. But what does that look like when the Pacers are in the playoffs? Well, there are other teams that you can kind of say that about, right? Atlanta, bad first game for the Hawks. They are really based around what Trae Young can do. That led them to a conference finals once. That's led them to some ugly playoff performances other years, right? What can the Pacers learn from seeing them kind of do that? And DeJounte Murray was brought in to kind of be this release valve for the pressure on Murray, and his offense has been like good, but not amazing this year, right? Like, how does that look? How does that style of one guy carrying so much of the load? Is that something the Pacers can look at and go, oh, we need to learn from that? Rhett and I were talking about that as well. Denver fits into this category to a much, much lesser extent, right? They've got a ton of safety valves between Porter Jr.'s ridiculous shooting and scoring ability and Jamal Murray's handles and also scoring ability. They're not a perfect comp, but they play through Jokic all the time when he's in. He basically touches the ball every possession. He is their identity, right? Same kind of deal. Can a team like that really get over the hump and be awesome? I think so in Denver's case. The Clippers are going to be like that. Kawhi was unbelievable in their first game because Paul George is out. When he returns, they will not fall into this category at all. But, if Kawhi can do that, I mean, wow, was he good in that Suns-Clippers game. If he can be that guy, and their identity isn't really built around him. They just have a lot of depth and general talent everywhere. But, how do they do it? What do they use his powers to leverage and get other guys open? Like, they got so many wide open threes just from his leverage in this game. And Russell Westbrook was really good too, outside of shooting terribly in this game. But you get the idea. Teams like that, how do they do? Can the Pacers learn from them? Just general roster-wise, in the way that the trade-offs kind of go in the team building process. Teams with a ton of depth, your Clippers who won, Boston who won, right? Do they look awesome? Do they look like they rue the day in this? There's not really a super team these days like there has been and for much of the last decade versus top-end talent teams that don't have a lot of depth, right? Your Phoenixes, your Denvers to a lesser extent, like their 7th guy in the playoffs is like Jeff Green probably. That's not very good. So what looks better when it's all said and done? Teams that are really deep like Boston and the Clippers like I just talked about, or the teams with the top-end guys who have really good top-end talent like Denver and Phoenix, but maybe not so good at other levels, or just Milwaukee who kind of has both, just run over everybody. Philly kind of has both there as well. Like, those teams just end up running through everybody, and then it doesn't matter at all, and you just say, oh, nope, the balance is better. And then the last team, or the last thing to talk about, is just more general, right? This is not necessarily something the Pacers can or can't copy specifically in their build, but what teams do well, right? Which teams actually do well? You could say, oh, look at this team and see what they do and study them. But like, let's say that team does bad. Like, what teams ultimately make the finals? What did they do well? How did they get built to this point? What was their strategy? What were the moves they made? Is that something that can be successful going forward, right? All sorts of stuff that every team will really be trying to copy. But, for the last couple champions, the Bucks, the Raptors, the Warriors, right? They were all built totally differently and had different key moments and key decisions and key drafts. And, the Warriors dynasty obviously clouds things a little bit, but like there's been a lot of unique champions in the NBA when there isn't a massive salary cap spike that makes the Warriors unbeatable. So what teams that do well, when those teams are determined, right? The Pacers should just study them. And that's just a generic thing that every team should be doing. But the Pacers specifically should go, okay, how did that team get here, right? We have assets. We have a solid base. What can we do to look like them or play like them or be like them while not sacrificing who we are and our identity as we go forward, right? That stuff will be determined going on through the playoffs, but just in general, when the final four teams, are left or whatever, looking at them and studying them and going, okay, this is something the Pacers can or can't do. How can they do that? Will be a relevant exercise for basically every team in the postseason. One more segment here, and this one I'm titling "What Teams Might Want the Pacers Vets," that is as self-explanatory as it gets, but Pacers have some vets who could be appealing to playoff teams, and that is the final thing I think I'll be watching among other things in this postseason. Let's get to that to close out today's show. Before we do that, though, I got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. Looking for a delicious snack, but don't want all the sugar and calories, then you need to try the best tasting protein bar ever. That's Built Bar. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices, but don't want to compromise on taste, Built Bar and Built Puffs are the way to go. They're healthy, they taste amazing, and you won't even think they're good for you because they taste so good. Well, what makes them taste so good? For starters, covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I don't know how they do it, but they taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they're healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And I don't even need to wait to get a box for years. We've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com. You can still do that, but now you can also get them at Walmart, where you can get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream double chocolate or coconut puff, or go to Sam's Club. If you're close to a Sam's Club, they've got 13-bar boxes there with hip flavors like brownie, batter puff, and churro puff. Thank me later. Try Built Bar today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Locked On Knicks or Locked On Cavs for your second listen. That's an interesting series that the Knicks impressed me very much in the first game, and those shows will be a good way to learn about that. For you every day, or just to listen every day, the rest of this week. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about the results of tonight's random draw. Very critical for the Pacers' potential draft positioning. They are rooting to win their own draw against the Wizards, for the Cavs to win their draw against the Grizzlies, and for the Spurs to win their draw against the Rockets, although that will not officially determine anything, as neither will the Pacers-Wizards draw. We'll see. We'll break that down tomorrow. Wednesday, Rhett Bauer will join us for an episode chatting about the offseason. Thursday and Friday will be the same guest. In fact, it will be a guest that will be on 7 different shows this month and probably early next month as well. I will not spoil who it is because it might spoil some content coming out on their end soon, but lots of really, really, really good episodes with one specific person coming your way later in this week. Let's dive into the last thing I want to talk about today. Usually, most years, I do a former Pacers in the playoffs to watch. You can look that up yourself, but if you want to know, I'll tabulate all of them for you at TEastNBA on Twitter. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about the Pacers veterans, right? The Pacers have this group of guys on their team, right? This is not the group I'm talking about, but they have 2 guys born in 1980 or before 1990, I should say, right? George Hill and James Johnson. And then there's Gabe York, who's in there for the end. He was born in 1993. But if you throw out Gabe York, they have those 2 guys born before 1990. And then on the other side, they have this whole crew born after 1996 started. There's 10 of those guys: Turner, Duarte, Brissett, Wara, Neesmith, Nembhard, Halliburton, Smith, Jackson, Mathurin, and Kendall Brown, right? And there's 3 players that don't fit in either group: Daniel Tice, Buddy Hield, TJ McConnell. Those are the vets that can still play and are good, right? Not that George Hill was good recently, but like George Hill and James Johnson are not, playoff contributors at this stage of their career. The 3 guys I just named are in this interesting phase where they're 30, they're still vets, they can still contribute, they're still good, and their fit on the Pacers is potentially solid, right? Buddy Hield and TJ McConnell specifically were great for this team, but their contracts, all 3 of those players could have an expiring contract this season, right? Tice has 1 year guaranteed left and then a team option. Hield has 1 guaranteed left and then he's a free agent. McConnell has 1 guaranteed left and then a partial guarantee in his last year, right? So not only are they vets who are pretty good and were valuable for the Pacers this year, they are expiring contracts, which could be valuable to other teams who would like to maybe go for it one more time or need depth at a certain position and don't want to break the bank, right? Like, they are very interesting guys to think about this summer. Perhaps the Pacers want all of them back. Perhaps, right? I don't know. I'll dive into the thinking on that more as the offseason progresses. But how this relates to the playoffs is those three guys specifically are guys that if a playoff team really needs a guy that does what those guys do, the Pacers would be a team that they would call just because of the Pacers timeline and those guys' age not perfectly coinciding. Now, if they had multiple years left on their deal, I wouldn't think that's as big of a deal, right? If your age doesn't match a team's build, that doesn't matter so much. But also the Pacers are trying to win next year, right? Kevin Pritchard talked about going from 35 to 45 or whatever, 50, whatever, wins next season, right? They want to get better and win. And so you need vets to do that. So I don't think they're rushing to trade these guys. I don't even know if they want to trade them at all. But that is something to watch in the playoffs, right? Let's say one of these teams comes out there and just can't shoot at all. Miami, right? They're not a good shooting team. The Lakers are a terrible shooting team. Obviously, they've been connected to Buddy Hield before. The Timberwolves shooting is atrocious. The Raptors just got eliminated. Their shooting stinks, right? There's a couple other teams. The Knicks shooting isn't very good, right? That you could say, hey, they need more shooting, right? They need someone who can shoot the dang basketball from three. Hey, Buddy Hield can do that, right? What teams fall into that category that go, wow, we could really use another shooter? And do they have stuff or pieces that would make sense to then go to the Pacers in exchange for Buddy Hield? That's just one example, but all three of those guys, I think, kind of fit into that thing, right? Do any of these teams that have good salary flotsam stink it up shooting the ball? Minnesota could fall in this group as well. They need shooting pretty badly, right? So that's something to watch. Does a team lose in 5 or 6 games in the first round, or even does a good team get to the second round and then just get blown over? And part of the reason they lose the series is they can't shoot, right? Some of the Lakers' thoughts against the Grizzlies, and part of mine was I didn't think the Lakers can shoot very well. They shot pretty well from 3 in game 1, but if that's a reason they can't continue that going forward, and they might just win now because Jaw's hurt, but that's concerning. Or if they lose in the second round because they can't shoot, right? You get what I'm saying. So that is one thing. Daniel Theis, another thing. Cheap backup center. $7 million, good player. Been to the finals before, been to the playoffs a lot. Fits a lot of systems because he can set good screens and he plays hard. He gives a lot of effort. And that sounds cliche, but those are valuable centers in the postseason. DeAndre Ayton did not look like a good effort player in this game today that he played for the Suns, for example. He was getting critiqued all over the internet, right? Theis's style, that bully ball style, can be relevant in the postseason. Are there any teams that, as the postseason progresses, go, wow, we could really use a center to soak up 10, 12, 15, whatever minutes for us in this postseason, right? For example, like the Golden State Warriors. Kevon Looney starts and they go with Draymond as the backup 5, and that works, but could they use another 7 minutes of an actual big, another 10 minutes of an actual big, right? There are a lot of teams like that. The Suns are going with Jock Landale and Bismack Biyombo as their backup 5 in the game. They just played, right? They could fall into this category. The Kings have been searching for center depth all year at their backup 5 spot. There are more than just those teams. The Nuggets need a backup 5. DeAndre Jordan ain't cutting it. The Daniel Theis, despite his value, certainly probably dropping this year, mostly because he just didn't play. But could a team go, oh, you know what? We know he's good. We could use him. We know he's healthy now, right? If Daniel Theis is amazing for Germany this summer too, perhaps the Pacers and that team could go, hey, you know what? Let's find a deal here. TJ McConnell, like Hield, played a lot for the Pacers this year. Value to the franchise. I don't think the Pacers should be rushing to trade either of those guys unless the offer is good. But does a team get through this postseason and go, dang, if we just had 12 to 15 minutes of better backup point guard play. McConnell wasn't great in his only playoffs for the Pacers, right, in 2020. But in general, could a team go, okay, if we just had 10 minutes of better point guard play? Because there's some teams that backup one isn't as good as TJ McConnell. The Suns are one of them. Now, Cam Payne was hurt for this game. Perhaps that changes their fortunes going forward. But they have no depth in general. So you could point to that for them a lot. But a lot of teams you could go, if they had a little bit better point guard play, perhaps they would look a little bit better, right? There's fewer of these because ball handling is just so important for a lot of these squads. Denver comes to mind a little bit, although their point guard rotation is pretty good. Memphis is so threatening in part because they have the best backup point guard in the league in Tyus Jones, right? They always have really good and capable backup point guard play, right? Could that be something that other teams like Brooklyn maybe, could they go, okay, if we had TJ McConnell, we'd be a little better. And I am just kind of taking a stab looking at these rosters of maybe these guys, but the play will bear it out, right? Maybe you look at a team and go, oh, Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry are pretty good. But then the Heat, credit to the Heat, their game 1 performance was impressive, but they flame out completely. And their point guard plays a big reason why. Maybe they go, okay, we need somebody else here, right? Like what you can look at the roster now, but the results will ultimately determine the need here for all three of these guys. So that's the last thing to watch, is that kind of in between group of guys, all on expiring deals. Does another team in the postseason go, or potentially expiring deals go, we could use that guy? And I don't think they'd be super expensive for us to get, given their contract situation and the Pacers team building situation. That's just a hunch, but I think that those guys, that is something to watch for this postseason that I wanted to tie in to wrap this hell up. Thank you guys for listening today. Hope you had a great weekend of enjoying NBA playoff hoops, because I did. Oh, it was fantastic. And I can't wait for the games going forward. Lots of good Locked On shows to break them all down. I've been jazzed up watching these postseason games. Tomorrow, we'll be talking results of the random drawing, what it means for the Pacers, where their picks are now, what comes next via the lottery, and a little bit about the top three in all the NBA awards, because the Pacers did not get any spots on that. Like I said, Wednesday, talking offseason with Rep Hour. Thursday, Friday, special guest, cool content coming your way about the Pacers. Can't spoil it, but you everydayers will obviously love it. Thank you guys so much for listening today. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. See you on tomorrow.